Hello, and thank you for watching this Hatfield Museum and History Society community presentation. Today's program is titled This and That, an Eclectic Look at Hatfield History, Part 14. In this presentation, we will be looking at a number of different parts of Hatfield's fascinating history that are not necessarily related. So here is the 2023 edition of This and That. Milton B. Bean was born in 1849 and went on to become a rather prominent and successful architect who lived in Lansdale. From the list of buildings that Bean designed, it's hard to imagine when the man had any time to sleep. In Hatfield alone, there were at least 14 buildings designed by Mr. Bean. Here in the borough, Bean designed Dr. Titus Albright's house on Market Street, which was built in 1892. After it was built, the editor of the Hatfield Times newspaper described Doc Albright's house as being the handsomest house in Hatfield. Here's a more recent photo of Dr. Albright's 1892 house. I should point out that architect Bean was a big fan of using turrets in his designs whenever possible. And so you can see one here in Dr. Albright's house. In 1884, George S. Snyder started a grain and feed business in a rented mill in South Hatfield across Cowpath Road from the South Hatfield Hotel. The arrow shows Snyder's mill on this 1893 map. One of the main products Snyder manufactured in his mill was Excelsior brands of cornmeal, which he found there was a rather high demand for throughout the eastern United States. The photo on the right shows employees at the Snyder mill making up bags of the cornmeal. In 1887, George Snyder expanded its business operation by purchasing a competing feed business on Market Street and adding coal and lumber to his product line. A hay business was also started, including the baling and shipping of hay by railroad car to all parts of the East. George Snyder's business quickly prospered, and soon he was saying to a friend, referring to a piece of land along the railroad tracks just south of the train station, "Do you see that plot of ground down there? Well, that is the spot I am going to purchase and build myself a home when I think I can afford it. One that will be a home to live in." By 1895, Snyder apparently felt that he could now afford his dream home and purchased the lot that he had his eye on. He then turned to Milton Bean to design his dream home. And I can't help but wonder if Snyder said to Bean, "And make sure it's bigger and nicer than that house you designed for Doc Albright." It was reportedly one of the happiest moments in George Snyder's life when in 1896 he moved into the prettiest home in the borough, even grander than Dr. Albright's house. Here's another view of George Snyder's wonderful house. And here's a sharper and more recent photo of George S. Snyder's 1896 home. And here's a view of the front of the Snyder home that few people get to enjoy since it faces the railroad property. Now, while I'm speaking about the Snyder house, I want to show you some of the unique features of this house. Here's the front double-arched door with quite uniquely shaped windows. And a closer look at these door windows. The house has a round turret on the front and an octagonal turret on the rear of the building. Inside the front door is a foyer area and these doors separate the foyer from the main hallway. This picture just doesn't do justice to the beauty of the glass in those doors. And another beautiful leaded glass window, this one an arched window located at the stairway landing between the first and second floors. A closer look at the leaded glasswork shows that each piece of square glass is multifaceted and each rectangular piece is made of ribbed glass. I can't imagine what it would cost to have a window like this made today, if you could even have one made. In addition to the Albright and Snyder houses, Bean also designed the Heidelberg Reformed Church building on East Lincoln Avenue, which was constructed in 1901. Though not the best picture of the church, it is the oldest one, taken around 1907. And here's a better picture from around 1944. Like most churches built during this time period, the building has magnificent stained glass windows, which almost always look nicer from the inside. So here's an inside view of the large front stained glass window. And another one of the church's windows. In Hatfield Township, Milton Bean also designed at least 3 rather nondescript little bungalows in the Oak Park section of the township, including the one seen here. But if you wanted an ornately designed building, it certainly seems that Milton Bean was the man to go to. And that is just what Albert H. Moore did in 1893. Albert Moore was the son of Andrew M. Moore, a millionaire distiller in Philadelphia. Back around 1888, the younger Mr. Moore owned 180 acres of land in Montgomery Township and 47 acres in adjoining Hatfield Township in the village of Calmer. On the Calmer land, he established the Cloverdale Stock Farm, a racing horse breeding farm. Among his first purchases were horses named Director and Red Wilkies, 2 of the most valuable trotting sires in the country at that time. He was said to have paid $135,000 for these 2 horses alone. That would be around $4.5 million in today's money. An 1893 newspaper article stated, "Mr. Moore has now the most famous collection of trotting mares ever owned by one establishment in the world." Eventually, his racing horse stock would grow to 178 horses. And apparently, it was the elder Mr. Moore who was funding his son's lavish lifestyle. That same year, 1893, the younger Mr. Moore hired Lansdale architect Milton B. Bean to design his dream mansion on a piece of land along Bethlehem Pike at what is now Richardson Road, almost across from the Montgomery Baptist Church in Montgomery Township. Now again, I can almost imagine Mr. Moore saying to Milton Bean, "You know that house that Charles Vanderbilt is building down there in North Carolina? Well, I want something like that." And here is the design that architect Bean put together for Albert Moore's dream house. As you can imagine from the design of this structure, Mr. Moore felt that money was no object. Once that Mr. Moore had hired Mr. Bean, it wasn't long before construction began. First, a stately wall was erected around the property with fancy iron gates. The grounds included reflecting pools, fountains, a guardhouse or 2, gardens, and statues. The landscaping was one thing, but the house was something else. Architect Bean pulled out all the stops designing it and came up with this fancy 4-story home, not including the clock tower in the middle. There would be plenty of room to roam in the new house, as it was to be over 200 feet long from one end to the other. Mr. Bean worked on this project for almost a year, and Mr. Moore didn't make things easy for him. He constantly made lengthy lists of changes he wanted incorporated into his plans. As you can see from this drawing, solariums were all the rage in the 1890s, so Mr. Moore ordered 2 of them, one on either side of the 100-foot clock tower. There was to be a grand entrance stairway, a greenhouse, and lots of balconies and turrets. Remember, I mentioned earlier that Milton Bean seemed quite fond of turrets. But the crowning jewel was that the building was to be constructed mostly from pink marble. Perhaps more pink marble than Mr. Moore could ever hope to obtain. For obvious reasons, this mansion was nicknamed the Pink Palace by locals who watched in awe as construction began. About the time that the walls were going up, Moore and his father had a falling out. At one point, Albert Moore sent an employee to Philadelphia to see the elder Mr. Moore and to ask him for money to pay the Cloverdale Farms hired hands. Mr. Moore responded, "I want you to tell Albert that if he don't come down and treat me as a son should treat a father, he will never get another penny out of me." What precisely happened next between father and son is not certain, but apparently it was not good, for Cloverdale Farms was soon sold, and Albert Moore was believed to have spent over $1 million, that's $33.25 million in today's money, on his horse farm venture, but got very little out of it. The 2 horses that he had bought for $135,000 were sold for less than $2,000, and the farm itself sold for only $20,000. The Moore Mansion project was also quickly abandoned, and for years after, what was left of the Pink Palace sat like a medieval ruin that disappeared little by little as people helped themselves to the spoils. This is a 1938 aerial photo of the property that Albert Moore was building his mansion on at the corner of Bethlehem Pike and Richardson Road. Even 40 years after the project was abandoned, you can still make out the driveways. Albert Moore's land was eventually bought by land steel contractor and real estate developer Harry Richardson, hence the name Richardson Road. So you may be asking yourself, what does this very interesting story have to do with Hatfield history? Well, I'm getting there. In 1912, Harry Richardson, who purchased Albert Moore's property on Bethlehem Pike, also purchased land on the edge of Hatfield Township just outside of Lansdale that he developed and called Oak Park. He promoted the Oak Park community to city folks, saying it was country living with the convenience of close access to both the train and the trolley. It was Harry Richardson's goal to make the Oak Park community as exclusive as possible. To add to the air of prestige of the neighborhood, in 1923, Richardson constructed this gated entrance to the community, and a pair of gates that he used were salvaged from the defunct Pink Palace project. And those gates continue to stand out there today, 100 years later. Now, Harry Richardson apparently had quite an interest in the American Indian. The Oak Park community entrance pillars, which held the Pink Palace gates, were decorated with American Indian-themed mosaics made from Henry Mercer's tiles. The left pillar mosaic showed a hunting Indian, the right pillar an Indian building a fire, and the center pillar had the name of the community and the date it was established. Each pillar was topped with an ornamental steel finial, presumably also salvaged from the Pink Palace project. Harry Richardson also placed at least 2 Indian statues within the community, and one statue still stands watch over the community today. At the intersection of Park Avenue and Parkland Avenue, there is a landscape triangle of ground on which stands an Indian with a dog that has lost its tail. And here's a closer look at that Indian and his tailless companion. As you enter the Oak Park neighborhood past the gates at Welsh Road and Squirrel Lane, a nice feature in the community that added to its uniqueness is a grass divider that separates the 2 lanes of traffic. This grass strip, in earlier years, ran all the way to Forest Avenue. And on this grass divider once stood another Indian statue. This photo shows 2 children sitting on the base of the statue. The statue portrays an Indian scanning the horizon while shading his eyes with his hand. You can't see it in this photo, but this Indian also has a faithful canine companion. The picture, although of quite poor quality, is the only one we have of this statue while intact. Unfortunately, this Indian statue was damaged in the early years of the Oak Park community, reportedly after being accidentally knocked over by a milk truck, resulting in the Indian's head and left arm breaking off. The statue also reportedly fell victim to Halloween mischief makers who colorfully painted it. Now you might think that a statue in such poor condition might just be discarded, but apparently that never entered Harry Richardson's mind. It was probably his fascination with the American Indians that led him to still save this damaged statue. In 1922, Richardson expanded his land holdings in Montgomery Township. Again, this is the former property of Albert Moore that Richardson had bought in the early 1900s. There it is. In 1922, Richardson purchased this large tract of land on the other side of Richardson Road. Harry Richardson eventually moved the headless and armless Indian statue from the Oak Park community to the old farmhouse on his new property in Montgomery Township, setting it near a pond on the property. Harry Richardson died in 1936, and his land holdings were eventually sold. But the headless Indian remained on the newer Montgomery Township property. This old aerial photo shows Richardson's newer property, and the circle shows where the spring-fed pond is located, and the arrow is pointing to the old farmhouse. Around 2005, the former Richardson property in Montgomery Township was developed. The old farmhouse and pond remained on the property, and the development was called Indian Lake Farms. The Indian statue was moved to a new location on the property, and if you're traveling on Richardson Road towards County Line Road, you can watch for it right at the intersection of Richardson Road and Veronica Lane. The old Indian is still standing there, keeping watch over the entrance to this newer community, as well as it could without his head, that is. This is another view of the statue, and you can see his ever-faithful dog by his side. And a closer look, and we can see that the dog has also apparently had a very rough life. So if you do see this statue, you will now know that it has a connection to Hatfield Township's historic Oak Park community. By the way, the Oak Park community is no longer a private community, and the large iron gates haven't been closed in over 60 years. So if you're in the area, feel free to take a slow ride through this neighborhood, check out the Indian statue, and enjoy the beauty of this unique historic section of Hatfield Township. Moving on, I want to talk a bit about two Hatfield men who had quite notable lives here in Hatfield in the field of music, and how their lives were, quite interestingly, intertwined. Jesse Bowman Aiken was born in March of 1808. Jesse married Eleanor, and together they lived on a Hatfield Township farm. We don't know exactly where the farm was, but we do know that they attended the Brethren Dunker Church on the Cowpath Road. This is a photo of the Brethren Church taken around 1905. Mr. Aiken holds an important place in musical history because in 1846 he invented the 7-character notes or scale in music. How about that? A year later, in 1847, Jesse Aiken was the first to successfully produce a songbook, The Christian Minstrel, utilizing his new 7-shape note system. 3 years later, in 1850, Jesse and Eleanor had a daughter, Mary. 2 years prior, in 1848, Isaac Ruth Hunsberger was born, and it was said that the Hunsbergers had music in their blood. About 20 years later, around 1868, Isaac Hunsberger went on to marry Mary, the daughter of Jesse Aiken, inventor of the modern note shapes that are used today. In 1872, Jesse and Eleanor Aiken sold their Hatfield Township farm and apparently moved in with their daughter Mary and her husband Isaac Hunsberger. There is no record of where the Hunsbergers were living at this time, but since they were also members of the Hatfield Brethren Church, I believe that they probably also lived somewhere here in Hatfield. That same year, 1872, Isaac Hunsberger, along with a Mr. Jacob Clemmer Allebach, published The Temple Harp, a collection of sacred music comprising the most popular psalms and hymn tunes, anthems, etc., in Jesse Aiken's new 7-character notes. Around 1878, Isaac Hunsberger built a house on the Cowpath Road. This would be the house on the northwest corner of what is now Main and Broad Street. For you Hatfield long-timers, this would be the house later owned by the Walkers. As you can see from this 1877 map, West Broad Street was not yet laid out, and the main road connecting Hatfield to Tulmenson Township was a 40-foot road, a part of which is now Tulmenson Avenue in the borough. Around 1879, Isaac Hunsberger built a shop adjoining his house for the manufacturing of organs. Reportedly, around this time, Hunsberger's father-in-law, Jesse Aiken, may have been an organ teacher and a salesman for Hunsberger's organ shop. But on July 22, 1879, not long after the shop was built, Hunsberger's organ shop was destroyed by an early morning fire. Now, there are several different accounts reporting on the fire, and they didn't really agree, making knowing what actually happened a bit difficult. One account reported that there was an attempt to establish a new organ factory by Isaac Hunsberger in Hatfield. The factory on Cowpath Road was destroyed by fire before production could begin. Another reported that the shop was full of organs which were all destroyed. In 1978, at the age of 80, J. Lloyd Wagner wrote of a story related to him by, I believe it was Frank Zepp. Mr. Zepp had told him that Hunsberger had built 2 organs and had sold them. While he was building the third one, lightning struck his shop and burned everything down. At that time, in 1978, it was said that a woman in Cedars had one of the organs and was offered $9,000 for it, but refused to sell it. This photo shows the Mennonite Brethren in Christ Church, also known as the Little Heaven Church, and presently Bethany Bible Fellowship. The church building was constructed around 1880, and there is an account which says that in the early 1880s, there was a Union Sunday School organized at the church with Harry M. Ziegler, the superintendent, and Isaac R. Hunsberger, the chorister. It also mentions that Hunsberger was a dealer in organs, that he placed an organ in the church, and that his daughter was the organist. So it's not really clear whether Hunsberger built a new organ shop somewhere else, where he made additional organs after the fire, or if he was just a dealer in organs after his shop burned. To add a bit more history trivia here, Harry M. Ziegler, the Little Heaven Sunday School superintendent, was at that time the owner of the Upper Hatfield General Store building at Broad and Market Streets, later I.C. Detweiler's store, and he was also the Hatfield postmaster. Now, only 2 of Isaac Hunsberger's organs are known to exist. A very complete one in wonderful condition, and possibly the one previously mentioned that was owned by a woman in Cedars, is property of the Lansdale Historical Society. Notice the candle stands on both sides of the instrument to provide illumination for the player. Here's another photo of this beautiful organ. And it is playable as well. This photo was taken during a 2015 Christmas open house at the Lansdale Society. The second Hunsberger organ is now on display in the Hatfield History Museum. It is almost identical to the one in Lansdale, although it is missing the candle stands and the ornamental top piece. Schedule a visit to the museum and see it for yourself. In 1883, 4 years after Hunsberger's organ shop was destroyed by the fire, Jesse Aiken's wife, Eleanor, died at the age of 57. By 1893, the Hunsbergers and Jesse Aiken had moved to Philadelphia, where they continued to live together until Aiken's death in 1900 at the age of 92. Even though Jesse Aiken was issued a patent for his music notes invention, he apparently died a very poor man, and no tombstone even marked his grave for many years. Why he died such a poor man is also a bit of a mystery, since he had published 6 musical collections during his lifetime, and one, The Christian Minstrel, alone sold more than 180,000 copies. His grave remained unmarked until 1959, when a stone was installed. Unfortunately, the marker mistakenly gave his birth year as 1812, which, as you can see, has since been corrected. Isaac Hunsberger got himself into a bit of trouble in October 1903. A newspaper article reported that he had been charged with fraud. The article, titled "Hunsberger's Clever Scheme," reported that he had represented to Hughes Brothers, piano dealers in Philadelphia, that he had 5 prospective customers for their pianos. Hunsberger produced signed agreements for the purchase of the pianos on the installment plan. So Hughes Brothers consigned the pianos to Hunsberger, which he then sold for cash to the various individuals. When Hughes Brothers sought out the buyers for the second payments, they were informed that the pianos had been paid for in full, and the authorities were quickly notified. The newspaper article reported of his fraud, "Hunsberger's method is said to be brand new." No further information could be found on Isaac R. Hunsberger, except that he died in 1925. If you follow us on Facebook, you may have seen this post back in January. It is a 1965 Help Wanted ad posted by the Hatfield Speedway, seeking drivers, men or women, to participate in a 100-car demolition derby on July 5th. Applicants were expected to sign a release in case of injury or death. I have been told that there was never any shortage of applicants for these demolition derbies. I have also had several people tell me that the 60-mile-per-hour mentioned in the ad was quite a joke, and that cars probably rarely got up to 30 miles an hour. This was a very popular post on our Facebook page and was shared to 64 other Facebook pages. It has been over 55 years since the Hatfield Speedway closed, and there is still a great amount of interest in it. 2 years earlier, this is an ad from 1963 promoting the demolition derby. 2.5 hours of watching 100 cars smashing, crashing, and wrecking. Hatfield farmers have raised dairy cows to provide milk for their families ever since the area was first settled. Before commercial dairies and creameries were established, farmers would process their own milk, making butter, cottage cheese, and cream. Buttermilk, the liquid left over after making butter, was sometimes fed to the pigs, who happily enjoyed it, or sometimes simply dumped into the nearest stream. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, the increase in demand by Philadelphians for milk and milk products had influenced a transition in farming for many southeastern Pennsylvania farmers, including those here in Hatfield. Instead of growing crops, many switched to dairy farming. Farmers had a couple of alternatives to processing their own milk. They could take the raw milk to the train station each morning to load onto a Philadelphia-bound milk train like the one seen here, or later they were able to join local dairy cooperatives called creameries who would buy their milk. The oldest Hatfield creamery was apparently the Calmer Creamery, established around 1884 in the tiny Hatfield Township village of Calmer. The creamery was located on the Bethlehem Pike, about 1/8 of a mile south of the railroad crossing near where Line Street is. This photo of the creamery is from the early 1900s. The building on the left there is the creamery's ice house, and the contraption in front of the building on the edge of the pond is an ice elevator used to lift blocks of ice harvested from the pond up into the ice house. The ice stored in the ice house would be used to preserve the dairy products during the warmer weather. In 1925, the creamery was sold to John Summer. Mr. Summer owned the creamery until his death, when it was apparently transferred to a relative, M. Summer. A 1954 Hatfield High School yearbook listed M. Summer Creamery as a patron supporter. And here's a photo of a milk can with M. Summer on it. Taken around 1965, it shows Hatfield's John Bolton pumping water into a milk can to use to water his garden. With a closer look at the milk can, you can more easily read M. Summer, Calmer, PA, embossed on the can. Just recently, I have for the first time seen the name M. Summer Cry, Calmer, PA, embossed on a milk can. The can was on display at the Boyertown Museum of Antique Vehicles, sitting in the back of a wagon. Here's a closer look at the can, and it's possible that a Mr. Cry joined M. Summer in the creamery business sometime after 1954, but I'm just not sure yet. And we are not sure either just how long the creamery continued to operate in Calmer after 1954. By the way, a visit to the Boyertown Museum is well worth the trip, even if you aren't particularly into old cars. There's a lot of interesting things to look at, including this old 1915 Hahn George S. Snyder delivery truck. One former dairy farmer related to me how he would normally sell his milk to the Martin Century Farms Dairy in Lansdale. But occasionally his cows would get into a patch of wild garlic, which would affect the taste of the milk. Martin Century Farms would refuse to take it, but he said that the Calmer Creamery was always happy to take the garlicky milk. He didn't know what they did with it, but speculated that perhaps they used it to make garlic butter. In 1895, Frank Howe purchased 76 acres of land at the corner of Cowpath Road and Orvilla Road from John W. DeLong. Here he established a creamery on his Guernsey dairy farm. This creamery continued until around 1914, when Howe sold his farm. Eventually, small local dairy farmers had another option for selling their milk for processing. They could sell it to one of the larger local commercial dairies that were starting in the area, like Rosenberger's Dairies in Hatfield or Martin Century Farms in Lansdale. In 1925, William F. Rosenberger bought the milk route of another area dairy farmer and started a dairy of his own on his Bergy Road farm, along with his son Raymond. In 1936, the business was incorporated as Rosenberger's Dairies and moved to 40-foot and Coffle Roads. Rosenberger's Dairies, being a larger dairy farm, processed and marketed their own dairy products. The business grew over the years from a single dairy farm to processing milk from more than 60 dairy farms in the Delaware Valley. Another one of Hatfield's larger dairy farms was the Hohen Brothers Dairy Farm on Coffle Road. John Hohen bought the former Abraham Allebach farm in 1910, and after his death, the farm was sold to his sons, Albert and George Hohen, in 1929. The Hohen brothers continued to operate the dairy farm until at least 1944. It appears that the farm was discontinued around 1948 and was then sold to the Hatfield American Legion around that time. It's always exciting for me to learn something new about Hatfield's history, and recently one of our Facebook friends sent me this picture of a cottage cheese jar dated 1930. He collects dairy-related items and had purchased this jar, but didn't know anything about it and was wondering if I had any information about where they had been located. Well, I had never even heard of the Allman and Borden before, so I got down to doing some research. I found out that in 1924, Allman and Borden purchased a farm at West Vine Street and Coffle Road that was previously owned by Isaac Hunsberger. Since this is the only piece ever seen from Allman and Borden, it is not known whether or not they produced other dairy products or perhaps just focused on cottage cheese. By 1944, Mr. Allman was the sole owner of the farm, and he soon began selling off parcels of his land for building lots and, of course, The whole property is now developed. The Facebook friend was glad to have this new information to go along with the jar in his collection, and he soon sent me another photo, this one of a milk bottle, and wondered if I had any information on it. The bottle is embossed TB pasteurized Calmer's milk, Calmer, PA. I did some more research, but this time, unfortunately, I came up with nothing. So this milk bottle produces yet another mystery in Hatfield's history. It was back in 1954 that Elmer Hartnett and his wife, Alberta, also known as Birdie, bought a number of tiny movie lots on the northeast corner of Cowpath and Ervilla Road. In 1955, Mr. Hartnett then contracted with a Mr. Wimmer, my guess would be maybe Warren Wimmer, to build a restaurant on that corner. The Hartnett Sandwich Shop was born. I'm told that the sandwich shop enjoyed lots of business from Hatfield Speedway attendees, including drivers, both pre-race and post-race. This kept them quite busy preparing hoagies, cooking steaks, and making milkshakes, often 6 at a time. It is believed that the Hartnett Sandwich Shop continued operation until the early 1970s. Over the next 30 years, the property saw many new owners: Pierre's, Jim's Drive-In, Richie's, Mike's Sandwich Shop, and Vincent's Pizza. In 2003, Vinny's Pizzarama opened at the corner and quickly became the go-to place for pizzas and steak sandwiches. In 2020, Vinny's Pizzarama moved to West Broad Street in the borough, and the old building was just demolished a couple of weeks ago. The property at the corner of Cowpath and Ervilla now awaits its next business, perhaps another pizza shop, but we'll see. Easter will soon be here, and back in the 1950s and 60s, that always meant it was time for the free Easter chick giveaway at Snyder's Hardware Store on Market Street. In 1958, Snyder's advertised an Easter giveaway of 10,000 free baby chicks with a limit of 20 per person. And the 10,000 chicks were gone in only 2 hours. Snyder personnel managed to obtain an additional 5,000 chicks, which were also quickly distributed. And I understand that these chicks were sometimes colorfully dyed, like those seen here. 3 years later, in 1961, you were limited to 15 free chicks per person. They also had Easter rabbits available for only 75 cents. This free chick promotion was, of course, a very clever marketing idea. Although no purchase was necessary to obtain your free chicks, they were sure to have a good supply on hand of Purina Chicks Startina, a specialized feed to help you get your baby chicks through their earliest days, as well as inexpensive feeders and waterers, to ensure that your baby chicks grew up to be big, tasty chickens. The Hatfield Easter egg hunt was a long-time Hatfield tradition for many years, and it was started by the Hatfield Lions Club back in 1947. In the early years of the egg hunt, children would meet at the Hatfield Firehouse on East Broad Street. This circa 1958 newspaper photo shows children gathering at the firehouse in anticipation of the big event. The children would then parade up to the grounds of the Hatfield Consolidated School on North Main Street, where the eggs were spread out all over the school's field. This photo, also from around 1958, shows egg hunters following the cars carrying the Easter egg hunt prizes. This picture is taken at Main Street and West School Street, and that's West School Street in the background. Each year, it was every child's dream that they would be the lucky one to find the elusive golden egg and win a special prize. In the early 1970s, the Easter egg hunt was moved to the grounds of Snyder Square. Lions, lionesses, and their families and friends would package over 300 pounds of Easter candy into about 6,000 bags. There were 140 chocolate Easter bunnies and several other prizes for the approximately 300 children who participated in the hunt each year. The event was later moved to School Road Park, and I believe the last egg hunt was held around 5 years ago. Many of you, I believe, have been around long enough to remember the national oil crisis of the 1970s, which led to very long gas lines, gas rationing, fueling your car on certain days, depending on your license plate number, and believe it or not, skyrocketing gasoline prices. That's right, that price of 77 cents per gallon was high back when this photo was taken in 1979 at the Gas and Go station located at Bethlehem Pike and Broad Street in Calmer. In 1971, the average retail price of gas was only 36 cents a gallon. Notice the Yum Yum donut shop was at the corner at this time, so they have been there for over 40 years. And on the right in the background, you can see Paul Moser's Calmer Auto Garage. The American Stores Company was started in 1917 with 4 small Philadelphia area grocery stores. By 1925, just 8 years later, American Stores had grown to nearly 1,800 stores. American Stores were opening up in many small towns, including Hatfield Borough. This photo shows the American Store that opened in Knipes Barn Building on East Broad Street, the building that is now home to a laundromat. This is an interior photo of the American Store taken around Christmas time, 1938. Store proprietor Russell Anders is on the left. Next to Russ is clerk Bill Dennison, then Mike Bowl, and John B. Anders, Russ's dad. The following year, 1939, Russ Anders apparently decided that the chain store was not for him. So he sold the business and opened up his own independent store, Russ's Market, right across the street, in the right side of the post office building at Broad and Cherry Streets. This photo from around 1943 shows Russ Anders there on the right and Harry S. Reinhardt Sr. on the left, standing out in front of the store. We can see that produce, meat, and groceries were all available at Russ's Market. Around 1945, Russ Anders moved his business out of the post office building and into a new building that he had constructed at 210 South Main Street. That's Russ Anders with his wife Laura in his new store. In 1955, Anders sold his business, and for a short time it operated as Ted's Market. In January 1958, the building at 210 South Main Street became the Speedway Bar and Grill, and the establishment enjoyed patronage from racers and spectators alike from the nearby Hatfield Speedway. Over the next 20-plus years, the business changed hands and names a number of times. I understand it was at one time the Ketch Tavern, Ed's Place, the Old Speedway, and the Ribbit Up Pub. This photo of the Ribbit Up Pub was taken in May 1988. The following month, the business was sold to Terry and Michael Loeffler, who renovated the building and reopened it as Casey's Saloon and Eatery. The business has continued under the same ownership and will celebrate 35 years of business this June. Right next door to Casey's, at the corner of Main Street and Blaine Avenue, sits this building, known to many Hatfield long-timers as the Bowling Alley Building. It was back in 1909 that Joseph B. Anders, a rather prominent man in the early years of Hatfield Borough, had the building constructed where he would operate a second-hand shop. He also rented out space in the building to a Mr. Abram Z. Ziegler, who in June 1909 opened a restaurant, pool parlor, and bowling alley on the first floor of the Anders Building. This 1914 insurance map indicates that there were only 2 bowling alleys in the building at that time. This photo shows the bowling alley building in 1943. At this time, the bowling business was being operated by champion bowler Irving P. Wireman. Here's a photo of a group of Hatfield men getting ready for a night of bowling in the 1950s, I believe. I think that I have all the names correct, but if not, I'm always happy to be corrected. I believe that they are left to right: Harry Klein, Edwin Nolan, Lemuel Birdsall, Russell Anders, Darrell Moyer, and Tom, just Tom. This photo shows the Hatfield High School 1953-54 bowling team inside of the Hatfield Bowling Alley. Seen here are Robert Green, Sam Loeffler, team captain Lee Snyder, Bob Landis, Bob Gottschall, Russ Kriebel, and Charles Dannenhauer. Coach Jerry Bauer is in the back. Starting in 1960, the Hatfield bowling alleys operated under the name Stillwell's Bowling. Now, although Brunswick patented the first automatic pin setter in 1958, that technical improvement never made its way to the Hatfield alleys. Instead, young boys and men continued to perform this rather hazardous, low-paying job, like those seen in this photo, which unfortunately is not from Hatfield. And I understand that you had to be rather quick on your feet as a pin setter, as some bowlers saw it as a challenge to test your speed. And a number of men, I'm sure, can recall their younger years as a pin setter at the Hatfield Bowling Alley. The Hatfield Bowling Alley was closed in the late 60s, I believe, and the building is all apartments now. But I recently came across this design concept for the building on the internet that looks like maybe someone is thinking of putting some commercial uses on the first floor, which might be nice, but we'll see. Here's a nice photo of the Broad and Market Street area as viewed from the railroad property over near where George Snyder's property was. The picture is from the 1914 Farm and Business Directory of Montgomery County. The building on the left is Knipes Hotel and is where Santucci's Pizza is now. The next building to the right is I.C. Detweiler's General Store, which is now a parking lot, and the next building is Dr. Albright's house that I discussed earlier, and that building is still standing. Universal newsreels were a series of 7 to 10 minute newsreels that were released twice a week to movie theaters between 1929 and 1967 by Universal Studios. The movie theaters would show these newsreels before the feature film, and they usually included a number of different short stories. I stumbled across a short newsreel clip about Hatfield on the internet a good number of years ago that I'd like to show you. It's not terribly exciting, but it is from Hatfield, so that makes it exciting to me. Now, these newsreels were always narrated, but unfortunately there is no narration that accompanied this video clip. The information supplied with the short 28-second film indicates that the subject of the film is a calf with a 7 mark on its forehead in Hatfield, Pennsylvania. And it mentions that the film was recorded on August 19th, 1936. Now, although the film is 28 seconds long, the title itself lasts for 6 seconds, so it goes by rather quickly. So let's take a look at the film. And please excuse the watermark across the picture. I just couldn't bring myself to pay $150 for an unwatermarked copy. Here we go. And that's it. Now, I wish we had more information about this film, like what farm this lucky calf was born on or who this little girl was, but we don't. So there you have it. Well, winter, such as it was, ended a week ago. Happy spring, everyone. We had a rather mild winter this year, but years ago, when the cold weather made a nice thick layer of ice on the local ponds, that meant it was time to go ice skating. Here's a photo of a good number of people skating on the frozen Kramer's Pond. Kramer's Pond used to be located just off of Coffle Road down near Oak Park Road. It was a great place for skating in the winter and also swimming in the summer. On this 1950s winter day, Bill Vincent and Buddy Moyer had the whole Kramer's Pond to themselves. This photo shows a great turnout for skating on Bergey's Pond in December of 1958. And of course there was Allebach's Pond and even Durstein's Pond to skate on as well. This great aerial photo from 1962 shows the George Didden greenhouses at the corner of West Vine Street and Butler Avenue after a major hailstorm had hit the area. A closer look at the photo reveals a couple of workers busily replacing some window panes broken by the huge hailstones. But greenhouse manager Daniel Ziegler was hardly upset about the damage. He had been planning for some time to replace the single thickness glass on the greenhouses with the double strength variety. Now, instead of paying for the project out of pocket, he had insurance money to cover the expense. He would often refer to the hailstorm as pennies from heaven. The greenhouse, with workers climbing on the glass roof, had already had its single thickness panes replaced by double thickness glass, so damage to that greenhouse was minimal. The greenhouse above it did not yet have the glass replaced, and you can see that the damage to that greenhouse was quite dramatic. I'm going to wrap up this evening's program talking about Irving's Chuck Wagon on Bethlehem Pike in the village of Line Lexington. The Chuck Wagon was located where the new 24-hour car wash now is, just south of the Univest Bank at Line Lexington Road. Back in the 1950s, the owner of Irving's Chuck Wagon certainly resorted to an unusual method of marketing their establishment. self-deprecating humor. Touting itself as the worst place to eat on 309, the luncheonette was reported to be under very poor management with lousy service and discourteous employees. They suggested bringing your mother-in-law in for a snack because she would surely thank you with her dying breath. Their appetizing menu included items like terrible burgers, lousy steak sandwiches, sloppy shakes, and gagging root beer. Takeout orders were recommended since there was no doctor on the premises. The back of the menu was full of useful tips for its customers, like, if you really hate someone, bring them here, watch them suffer. Of course, this was probably quite a delightful little restaurant with good food and attentive management, but they sure had a fun menu. The Chuck Wagon changed hands in 1964 when it became known mostly as Alice's Luncheonette. That luncheonette closed for good around 1972. And that's it for our 2023 edition of This and That. I hope that you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.